Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Mr. Sharif El-Mekki. Mr. Mekki, or El-Mekki, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Thank you, Dr. Cross. Great to be here with you. Yeah, excited about this topic, this conversation, as well as the work that you're doing.
Man, I appreciate you being here. I know when I just started this journey back in 2018, when I really get specific on especially empowering Black male students, your work came across and I was encouraged to learn from what you are doing, being that you have been in the work or doing this for a long time. And I know you've been in education for over 30 years. Man, that's some real commitment. And we need it, especially when it comes to having Black males in the classrooms or Black males at the forefront, encouraging others to serve in the education system. So, man, I really appreciate your commitment to serving.
Listen, I look at this work as an honor to be able to be a part of it, to be able to be a part of it this long and continue to draw inspiration from the folks that I'm serving, right? And when I look at it from that angle, not only is it from the youth who inspire me, who I'm working diligently to support, but also our elders and those who laid a path. Some who've gone and we stand on their shoulders, and we also lean on their shoulders, because there are plenty who are still here today, or their works continue and their legacy. And I think all of our responsibilities to continue to light and pave a path, so that the next generation behind us can run faster, be smarter, build upon what was dealt with, but also learn from, both the wins and the mistakes. And so I'm grateful and honored that this is part of my journey, is to be in this space and to be in this educational space. So
yes, man, and that's really awesome. But I should say that you are the CEO and founder of Center for Black Educators Development.
Yes, yeah, Center for Black Educator Development. We piloted our work in 2018 and formally launched a year later.
Okay. But before we get into the conversation itself or the questions that I have to ask you, I would love for you to share more about yourself so the listeners can have an idea of who you are and some of the things that you are currently doing.
Sure. So I'm first of all, a child of activists, Sharif El-Mekki, Hamid Khalid, my stepfather, Yahya Abdulaziz, grandnephew of Mariam El-Mekki Abdullah. And I think these activists, I think, really help to plant seeds that continue to flower today. And I also am a student. My teachers used to say students are known by their teachers and teachers are known by their students. So I'm also the student of people like Mama Fasaha, Baba Changa, Baba Jahudi, Mama Renee, Fluellen, who also just poured into me and us in a particular way. Eventually, I became an educator, and I was in a school and as a teacher and a principal for 26 years, all in West Philly, Southwest Philadelphia. And in that quarter century as a teacher and a principal, I was in 3 schools, and I'm really just excited that they were neighborhood schools. And so all of my learning came in these communities about education, because I thought I was on my way to law school. So this was not my chosen path initially. I knew I wanted to be in social justice. But a gentleman named Dr. Martin Ryder was recruiting Black men to teach back in the early 90s. And he helped me connect the dots between educational and racial justice. And once I started, I just never looked back. I realized this was the place that I could really dive into and be in community, while also having just hopefully what would amount to a large impact and influence on students as they were growing up and choosing their path and how they were going to change society. So I started off at middle school, ended up as a principal at Shoemaker, which was a middle and high school. So I had the best of both worlds, or 2/3 of the world, with middle and high school. And for the past decade, was also just really interested in teacher preparation, teacher effectiveness, and teacher diversity. Just seeing that there wasn't just a Philadelphia issue with the lack of Black teachers, Black male teachers in particular, but this was a national issue. And so was working on that with a variety of folks. We started the fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice, and but eventually landed on launching the center because we felt like a pathways, a really strong, robust pathways program needed to be part of the solution. So at the Center for Black Educator Development, our work is to rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline, and to do that through policy, professional learning for all, and then pathways specifically for Black youth to expose them and give them clinical experiences about what teaching is, but doing it through an intergenerational model where they teach first, second, and third graders as they're being mentored by us, college students, high school students working with first, second, and third graders. So being, again, in community, trying to rebuild the Black teacher pipeline in community of others who are doing this, because no organization is going to do that by themselves, obviously, but doing it in partnerships in community with others, but having a really holistic view of it. Like, what are the policies that support and undermine the Black teacher pipeline? What are the mindset and skill level of educators, whether they're on school boards, district or school administration, or colleagues of current and future Black teachers? What is their role? And then also, of course, the mindset of the Black educators who are coming in as well.
Man, that's awesome. As you touch on mindset, with the Black males that's coming in, how would you describe their mindset when it comes to being a teacher?
So the young men that we engage with, they are they're very interested in social and racial justice and educational justice. We launched Future Black Teachers of Excellence Fund, and that basically provides a fellowship for students who've come through our program who are interested in teaching for at least 5 years. And our first cohort were all young Black men.
Oh, wow.
Young college, so they're getting, not only are they part of this fellowship, they receive some college scholarships, some last dollar scholarships while they're in college. They also will receive a retention bonus once they get to their 5th year of teaching. And you know what? They're so much more focused than I was when I was 19 and 20 years old. And so their desire to really look at this as a craft so early on, when I was still looking for my way and trying to figure out how I wanted to jump into activism and fighting for social and racial justice, they're more clear-eyed than I was. And it's just really, really great to see. And so these 4 young men launched their inaugural cohort. And so being able to watch them has been really fantastic. They want to, as Mary Church Terrell said, lift as they climb. And that's what they're doing.
Yes, and as you mentioned, so being that they had the desire to provide social justice, so I think, as you mentioned, that was kind of the foundation that they need to do the work. Maybe they needed the guidance, and being that you were already being in that space, I think that was really good for them. So after those young men started, so how did it evolve into what you're doing now to get more Black males in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, we have a variety of ways, but the main part of it is our Pathways program to rebuild a Black teacher pipeline. And the Pathways has 3 parts. So I mentioned the Fund for Black Future Black Teachers of Excellence Fund. That's a component of it, but that's for students who come through the program. And the program is twofold. One, there's a out of school time experience, where it's a paid clinical experience. And matter of fact, that we're recruiting for right now. It's called Freedom Schools Literacy Academy. And these are high school and college youth who sign up for paid clinical experience. So we're saying, hey, if you're interested in teaching, educational justice, giving back to the youth, learning the foundations of how to support first, second, and third graders with their positive racial identity development, and they're supporting their literacy skills, come join us. And so they join us through this Freedom School Literacy Academy. We call it FSLA. And that's out of school time. So after school or in the summer, high school and college youth come to us and we train and develop them as they're teaching first, second, and third graders. So they're having real-time experience teaching and being coached, supported, and mentored by our staff. So that's one part after school and in the summertime. And, we're recruiting right now. So if anyone in your audience knows, and we have a virtual model, but we're also in Philly, Camden, Detroit, and Memphis, where we have in-person sites in those 4 cities. And then we have a virtual model that typically has about 13 states represented. So we have a lot of youth from all over the country who sign up to participate in this. And then there's a during the day component. So imagine an elective that a high schooler could take as they matriculate through high school. And it's basically teaching one-on-one, but it's from a Black pedagogical framework, a Black historical lens. And it speaks about how have African people, what are their relationships with teaching and learning, scholars and scholarship, education, and self-determination. So that is what is baked into the curricula. And they are able to take this as an elective, dual enrollment, and also CTE credits is how that's designed. So you can imagine a high school student where I'm taking this course as one of my electives. I'm taking my English, my history, but I'm also taking this course where we named it after LeCount and Caddo, Caroline LeCount and Octavius Caddo, 2 just legendary Black educator Hall of Famers who were also, they were a couple. And so we named this curriculum after them, LeCount Caddo, but that is part of the Teacher Academy. And so imagine a career pathways for high school students who are interested in exploring a career in education. And so you can take that during the day at our partnering high schools, but then you can also have a job teaching through our FSLA program, where we're like, hey, you don't have to go to McDonald's, Starbucks, and car Enterprise Car Rental. You can come work in your community and teach first, second, and third graders and be paid. That could be your job of giving back to your community in this very specific way.
Man, that's awesome. As you were talking, I can recall you were saying, especially Black males don't see teaching as an option. But with the work, do you think by providing the exposure and the impact that Black males can have, that will encourage more Black males to become teachers?
It's interesting, like, even though with the low numbers of Black men who are in teaching, when we look at college degree, Black students with college degrees or young Black men with college degrees, education is high percentage of the degreed folks. And so we also have to look at just the barriers of that exist. We have to look at the experiences that they have in high school and college that may thwart and undermine their attempts to become teachers. Because there's some young Black men who are sitting in classrooms right now who consciously or unconsciously thinking, even if they were interested in education, they don't want to be colleagues of the people who are now leading their classroom in schools, right? So our friend Dr. Chris Emden often speaks about recruiting young Black men to teach is akin to recruiting someone to return to the scene of a crime against themselves, right? And so if they're having that type of negative, toxic environment as a student, they may not think about like, oh, let me come back here and change it. They may just think of, how do I get out of here? And we see many Black youth who end up not even finishing because of their experiences, right? And so if they're not finishing school because of their experiences, how could they even think about continuing and then adding more in some hostile environments in higher ed even to then return, right? And so some of them, it's just hard for them to fathom. But we also, a lot of our youth are also considering becoming the teachers that they wish they had and knew they needed. And they're thinking about, hey, you know what? I had a miserable experience, but my younger brother and sister is coming up behind me. My neighbor or my cousin or my own children are going to be in some of these same systems. So I need to make sure that I'm coming back and I'm being a vanguard and making sure that they're taught superbly and that I am coming in with a revolutionary mindset and revolutionary actions in my lesson plan, in my relationship building, and in my teaching, so that it is a radically different experience for the next generation behind me. And so all of that is a part of like the conversations that we typically have. And then we do things like our annual Black Men in Education convening. We used to call it the Black Male Educator Convening, BMEC. If folks look up hashtag BMEC 2022, they'll get a little glimpse of what the experience was for Black men from all around the country. I think there were 30-something states represented at this convening last November, 16th through the 18th here in Philadelphia. And it was the 5th national BMEC, and we're looking forward to continuing to support Black men in that space as well.
Oh, man, that's awesome. And I
So
know,
hopefully we see you there next year as well.
well, that's one of the things that I want to do. Is it this year, right? November this year?
November this year coming up. Yep.
Okay.
We'll announce the dates pretty soon.
Yes, man. Most definitely. I will put it on my list of things to do or participate in this year because I saw the pictures and I saw the experience, and I even spoke to one of the gentlemen that presented
Oh, really?
there,
Okay.
and he said, "Man,
Who's
you
that?
need to, Dr. Waters."
Yeah, Dr. Donnell Waters,
Yes.
that's such a small word. Dr. Donnell Waters, and I love saying his name, Dr. Donnell Waters. That was one of my former students
Yes, he
in
mentioned that.
Philadelphia. And so to be able to not only have him as a student of mine, but then now to see him leading in education
Yeah.
in his own way and down in Fort Worth, Texas, and but also having him present at a convening we were sponsoring is like, yeah, I mean, my heart can explode over stuff like that. So it
Yes.
was
Yes.
just really grateful and honored that he's about the work that he's doing. Just really proud of that young man.
Yes, yes. He spoke very highly of you. So when I told him that when I started those 9 things that educators that are teaching Black students need to know, so I was sharing that with him as well, because that was one of the go-to article for me, from having the right mindset, from helping the students to developing the right identity. I think as educators, that's important. You're going in the classroom with a right mindset, believing in the students that you are teaching. But when it comes to developing a positive racial identity, how would you encourage educators to, or the importance of helping students to develop positive racial identity?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to make sure that we're constantly excavating our own mindsets and actions, and really like being aware of like how we think about Black people, Black youth, Black culture, Black communities, Black parents, and Black students. Like, how do we think about them, and who taught us to think about them in that particular way? Really tracing the intellectual genealogy and like how we have arrived. I've spoken to educators who, when they realize it, like, hey, you know what, that was racial biases, or I had like anti-Black sentiments in some of my language, and they have to really sit and think about, where did I learn that? Did I learn it from society, from the media, a TV show that I'm watching? Did I learn it at my dining room table as a child, in
Wow.
my car rides home from school with my family? Like, where did I learn it, so that I can understand and excavate, and then making sure that I have the filter. But even a filter has to be cleaned often, right? And if not, you'll still have the sickness, the infections that can occur. So when Dr. Beverly Tatum talks about this invisible smog that everyone, including Black people, are inhaling, we have to be aware of that, first of all, that there is this invisible and sometimes pretty conspicuous, but often there's also hidden messages and things like that, that because they're so pervasive, we just become accustomed to them. And if we're not vigilant, then we may end up internalizing them. And so you'll even see Black people with anti-Black mindsets. And so that's the first thing, is like dealing with our own mindset, making sure that we have a healthy understanding. And then once we're doing that, and there's no end game to that. That has to be a constant practice of being not only reflective of our own thoughts and actions, but also soliciting feedback about our thoughts and actions, because we also have to understand how are students experiencing our leadership in this classroom or in the school or in the district, right? So we can't just say like, oh, I was reflective and that was it. Part of your reflective also has to be others' feedback about their experiences with you. Because if not, we can reflect. It's like practicing, a problem incorrectly. You're like, I practiced so hard. Yeah, but if you were practicing incorrectly, you're not getting better. You're actually cementing the muscle memory of practicing poorly, and that's how it'll perform. Same thing with our mindsets. We have to make sure, yes, we're thinking, we're reflecting. We also have to have a prism to look through and feedback to receive it. And after that, we have to, not only are we auditing our own selves, we have to audit the environment. What does the curricula say about Black community, Black history, contemporary Blackness? What does it say in there? What's on our walls? What's in our language? Who are the heroes that we say exist? Even language. Now, I was so blessed. You know, I talked about some of my teachers at elementary school. They used to say, and this is a pre-K to sixth grade school. So even as a young second and third grader, when we're taking classes and our teachers are saying, when people talk about classical,
Yeah.
make sure you ask them what part of the African diaspora are they referring to? What
Oh,
part of the Black diaspora are they referring to? Is it Harlem? Is it the Deep South? Is it during the Great Migration? What is it about classical? Because typically in this society, as soon as someone talks about classical literature, everybody automatically assumes that, oh, that should only be attributed to European and white American classical arts, classical literature, classical paintings, right? It's like, oh, classical is only for this group. No, every group has their classics. But as
okay.
soon as they can make you think that the default of classic should be attributed to whiteness, that means they got you,
Oh, wow.
right? And that's just a small example, but that's something even as a youth, we were being taught. Part of like the protection against anti-blackness and this idea of and white supremacy.
Yes, and as you mentioned, I think one of the ninth principle in the nine things that needs to be known as educators is a sense of purpose. So
Mm.
I think those educators have been modeling a sense of purpose.
Oh yeah.
Once they in the classroom and help the students to think more purposefully and understanding just themselves from being the teacher who understands.
Oh yeah. I mean, and when you look at like, you know, Baldwin's one of his quotes that I just really love, where it was this idea where he talks about the more you're educated, the more you start critiquing the systems that you're a part of.
Hmm.
Right. And so like to me, that's such a profound and important orientation, right? Like not to become so educated that you're just championing whatever system and institution you're a part of, but becoming educated so that you can really reflect critically about like, wait a minute, is this the right way to educate our youth? Is this the right system? Is this the right funding stream? Is this the right opportunities? Like all of that should lead you to more critique, not less. And unfortunately, there are too many people who become more educated and yet more ignorant simultaneously. More
So
educated and they call themselves enlightened, but more hard-hearted about the next generation who's supposed to be coming behind them.
So that, as you mentioned, is I came across a quote, and I don't remember exactly how the quote is, but
Mm-hmm.
educators should be liberators, but yet some become oppressors. They continue the system because they're not thinking, maybe even critically, about what they are doing. They're just carrying out the mandate that they
Mm-hmm.
were told. So, although they should be there to be liberators, they end up being oppressors in the classrooms. So, I'm just going to switch gear a little bit, which still may come across some of the same perspective that you have been sharing. But the goal is to help Black men realize the impact they can make or we can make in the world. So, this question is my first question really: what is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
Well, I mean, from what I learned and what I've seen, the first part of that is like love. Like you have to love the people that you're serving. Unfortunately, so many students, what they experience are people's contempt. And the contempt may be masked. There may be a veneer of positivity, but behind it is contempt. And with that contempt often comes low expectations. Even pity. If you even sometimes when even people have pity for someone, there's also a level of contempt that I have to have pity for you.
Oh,
Right. And so like it's a orientation that unfortunately many Black youth experience from educators who are supposed to support them. And so I think and having love for someone means to me means two things. Like this is part of the orientation. I think that's very important. You can't teach people how to love someone, right? Like it's like you can teach them how their actions show love or show contempt. or hate, right? Like, but to actually love someone means that one, you're going to have high expectations for them because you believe in them so much. Not these high expectations where like the child can't make any mistakes or anything like that, but no, because you believe in them and so much. And you look at them as like, hey, you know what? You are actually my replacement. You are going to stand on my shoulders and do something else. Like my success is actually tied to your success, right? Like that's the deep, it's the love of a parent, right? Parents like, oh yeah, like no matter how well I did, I expect and want even better for you. The trials and tribulations I went through, I wanted to make sure that you don't have to go through all of those. And you're going to have your own trials and tribulations. Can't protect you from all of them, but your relationship with me should not be one of those trials and tribulations, so to speak.
Yes.
But then the other part of that love is accountability.
Okay.
That I'm accountable for your success. And right now, there's so many, unfortunately, educators who shun the idea of being accountable for Black children's success. There's a whole lot of people who say, "Oh yeah, I'll teach them. I'll come teach them." There are less of that group who say, "I will be accountable and I'm responsible for their success." And to me, that's a deeper level of love, and that's the orientation and mindset, number one, of that. And the other part is justice and like understanding historical injustices that have undermined the educational system, but also current day, what's happening right now, and how is my teaching and leading undermining an unjust system? Or is it holding it, lifting it up, and sometimes, unfortunately, protecting and perpetuating it?
I will start from the mindset of love or loving those who you are entrusted to serve. And I think that is important because if you don't love the people that you are serving, you sometimes will only be of a disservice to those people that you are serving or entrusted to serve. And as you mentioned, that if you don't say check yourself per se, you may continue with a system that doesn't really serve those who you're trying to serve. And I think having the mindset of loving the people or of love will give you a better, what I would say, a better perspective on serving those individuals that you should be serving. And I think sometimes, because even myself, I've seen where students complain that the teachers per se don't love them, don't respect them, don't believe in them. And it's hard to believe in someone that you don't love. And I think it stems from, as you mentioned, having that love for those you are serving will really, really remove that barrier from you not believing in them, from you not valuing them. And I think that perspective really need to be emphasized, especially if we want to change the narrative. So my next question is, what advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
Yeah, I think one of the most important thing for us as men entering this space is to understand understand how children learn, understand like the art and science of teaching. I've met so many young men who, and generally older men, are, you know, not necessarily this next generation, but my generation, Gen X and above, who sometimes have this kind of legacy parenting, as Hillary Beers speaks about, where it's almost like I should command a classroom just because I'm a man, just because I exist. And many of us, when we look at that and we trace back how were we raised, and sometimes we think the same way that we were raised as individuals is how we should teach 30 or 130 children, right? And what I mean by this is sometimes I'll see men stand in a classroom and not use any art or science or technique in their teaching. It's just do as I say.
Hmm.
If I said something, then obey it without question, and a kind of an authoritarian stance that, you know, one, it's going to be really hard to build the relationships that necessary to get accelerate the achievement of students. because of that type of orientation, without the added piece of the art and the science. Like, what's the technique of investing, having students invest in their own education, not just because you gave a command and they obeyed, but how do you get them to invest in their own selves and in the community, right? Like, which means in you as the leader of the classroom or school, but also in their peers, right? And that's a different type of orientation. And I find, like, old school parenting,
Yeah.
sometimes legacy parenting, sometimes has a certain bit. A lot of folks, you can go around the country and start a sentence, and people talking about call and response, people will be able to respond like, do as I say, not as I do. Be seen, not heard, right? Like, all of those type of things. Sometimes people are trying to infuse that in their teaching. And doesn't mean that you're not a authority figure. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't command the respect and attention. But I think sometimes people rely on one way, and when you trace it back, it can sometimes be two things. One, it can be from trauma that they experience in their own schooling and educational systems, but then also it can be from how they were raised. And also being raised in a house and being raised and raising, kind of educating folks in a school, in a collective, it doesn't always translate directly. So I think that's one, just understanding our trauma, understanding our own histories, understanding back to where did I learn how to lead,
Yeah.
and how, and being really reflective and dissecting that just so we understand it a little better. I've had so many conversations, and we would lead PD with folks who say, oh yeah, well, these kids are not listening, not disrespectful. Like, all right, well, how are not respectful, how are you building community? And they can't name any specific thing besides I showed up and I told them and I showed up, so they should just know how much I love them because I'm here. And I'm like, it takes more. It takes more than that. Sometimes that works. And I'm not saying that should never just be off the table, but it has to be more to it than that. Particularly if you're seeing like that alone isn't working to build a community that's going to support and foster the deep learning we say we're committed to. Because at the end of the day, that's the end game. How much can they learn? How quickly can they learn? And what's the community necessary for them to learn?
Yeah. And spending some time in the classroom myself, I realized that the relationship is important, and it's not forced relationship. I believe sometimes students will rebel if they feel as if you're trying just to this authoritative type of approach.
Yeah, if it's only about asserting your authority, then you know what I mean. And if it's only about students being perfect, and if it's only about them respecting you, right? Like, is that teaching or is that ego?
Yes, and that's something that I learned early, although when I went into the classroom, teaching wasn't something that I was actually starting my journey to do. I
Mhm.
eventually in the classroom, and I realized that making the students feel valued will get the students to participate more than trying to tell them what to do. Like, you need to do this because I'm telling you to do it. So making them feel valued will lessen them rebelling against what you want them to do. And once they feel valued, they will more than likely follow the instructions. And after a while, that relationship will be built, and then you can get them to do more things. And that's just from my perspective, especially knowing that I didn't get the support that I think I needed as a student. When I started to do the reflection, being in the classroom, seeing some of these students like coming from similar background as myself, then I realized that, you know what, my approach have to be different. It's not just me telling them. I need to know their experience, what their experience like. And from when they share from their experience, then you can make the connection. Then they feel as if their experience are valued. And once they get that feeling, they start to make the connection with in-class learning and how their environment may have affected some of their perspective being a student. That's one thing that I've realized. And when it comes to changing or creating positive change, I realized that we have to build those relationships with those individuals that we want to see themselves in a different light.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I think particularly when you were raised to like you just respect adults no matter what. Like that's the default, right? And so with working with youth today, that may not necessarily be the case because, and I think some of it is because they've been let down so often by adults. They've been overpromised or undelivered or not even promised anything, let alone overpromised. They just not even. I think in some ways, each generation we have to really reflect on the conditions that the next generation are growing up in, that form their orientation and their mindsets and their kind of self-preservation habits that have developed. Why do they have to preserve themselves in that type of way? How do we set the table for them to have to think about themselves and their survival in that particular way? And so when we look at it that way, that means we're partly responsible, significantly responsible. And so that means that has to go into the calculus of how we approach the next generation. We can't set the table and then come in and disparage them for using the utensils in the way that we established or not setting them with utensils, whatever it was, right? Like we set the table. Not the greatest analogy, but that's how I kind of just think about like how do we set the conditions
Yeah.
and then not
But teaching them
and then
how to,
disparage them about how they're doing it. Like Malcolm once said, like he has little patience for society that will crush someone, put their foot on their neck, and then criticize them for how they're trying to walk and how they're trying to survive with that while being crushed at the same time. Not thinking about, oh, how do I crush them less? I'm just going to criticize you for how you're reacting to being crushed. And I think we're not careful. That type of mindset again can find itself in our schools, in our classroom, in our teaching and learning, or say the miseducation, to paraphrase Dr. Carter G. Woodson, like that's part of what leads to miseducation.
and as you mentioned, we criticize the young people at times without understanding their
Mhm.
experience
Without
before they
listening
get
to
to
them.
us. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one perspective that we all have to analyze, especially when we are dealing with young people. Do you understand their experience and how do we approach that experience? So it's to become more culturally competent about the students that we are serving. Because when we don't understand them, then as you mentioned, that we may be criticizing something about them that they themselves may not be aware of why they may show up the way they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I mean, and a big part of like understanding them is back to listening, right? And I also just want to come on like what a black man or what advice would I give or how to think. I think one, recognizing like one, how hard it is to listen a lot of times, right? One, time, distractions, how things are set up, right? Like you have 7 periods a day, so to speak, in your school, and you're teaching 6 of them. And then in that last period, and during that time, you got 45 minutes or an hour and a half of his block schedule, whatever it is. Like, how often do you get the chance to listen to individual children, your students, right? Then if you have 100 of them, how do you get to listen, right? Like, and so it's so important to try to understand how to carve out, but then also listening comes in a variety of ways. It may be listening through their writing and seeing what they're saying, listening through their words, yes. But also sometimes listening is from watching and listening through behavior and
Yeah.
saying, okay, what is this child actually saying? How is this behavior tied to what their needs are, what they're trying to communicate? Maybe they don't have the right words for it or the language, right? Maybe they felt disrespected. Maybe they felt marginalized, and their response to that is how often human beings respond to it. It's like, oh, adults, if they feel disrespected, this is how they respond. But if it's a child, less mature, been on earth a lot fewer years, but they can't respond that way, right? So sometimes you see like this accountability for children is even higher than we hold adults accountable for some of those same behaviors, right? And so really, I think, I read one time when I was a teacher, and it just so and I forget how many minutes, but it was such a small number that it just shocked me. And it basically was the idea like most individual children as a child, most of them have one-on-one conversations with an adult for less than 10 minutes a day.
Wow.
And you think about it, in a school, in a classroom setting, that's probably hard for them to do, right? Like it's a group speak, or even when people say, talk to your partners 3 seconds, or you give a one sentence response, in an exchange. But like actually being listened to and having a conversation. They may get home, parents may be working, parents may be busy, parents may be distracted, a whole variety of things, right? And so that adds up, right? And so not only are we not accustomed to listening, but our youth aren't accustomed to being listened to.
Wow.
And that dynamic together can be some of the most problematic, talking about like group dynamics. That could be part of the fundamental issue is one's not accustomed to listening, the other was not accustomed to being listened to. And how do you come together and build a community of learners, where the teacher is the head learner, but he's a learner nonetheless in a community. Right. And so those are the kind of things that we have to be thoughtful about as we're teaching and leading classrooms, schools, and districts.
And as you mentioned that some of the students haven't been listened to, and then over time they may have things that they want to share, but because no one have listened to them over the years, they now not say become mute, but they internalize most of what they're experiencing without sharing it because they don't believe anyone will listen to them or understand what they're dealing with. Because you mentioned earlier that see as you, what was that saying that you mentioned earlier, that see and not be heard. So if they are in that environment where you're only supposed to be seen and not heard, then over time, the experience that they're having or want to say something that maybe will help to liberate them, they may internalize it and don't share it because they grew up in a space where they should only be seen and not heard. So just understanding that our students are people, and sometimes to get them to become who they can be, we have to listen to them or give them that opportunity to share their experience and be open without being judgmental, just to listen what you're saying and how we can best serve our student. But my next question is, how can we as a Black men help to change the narrative today?
Yeah. I mean, part of the narrative of today is really centered on anti-Blackness, right? And so that's a big part of it. And so decidedly becoming anti-racist in both our how we teach, how we build relationships, how we communicate, how we build community. All of that is important. We often teach our teachers that every lesson plan is a political document, and every time we teach, it's a political act. Because it's saying when we teach, when we're even before we even enter the classroom, when we're thinking about what and how to teach, it's political because we're in that act of planning, we're saying what we believe about Black youth, what we believe about Black boys. So even before we show up, we're already thinking and we're putting pen to paper or typing on the keyboard about this is what I believe about this next generation. And this is what I believe about my own self-efficacy with this next generation, right? And so when we think about just the narrative about Black boys, about Black youth, about Black men, about Black communities, how and what we teach can be the counter narrative to that, the counter narrative to anti-Blackness, the counter narrative to low expectations for Black boys, the counter narrative about Black men and their role in society. So all of that, I think, ties back into, and if there's such just hatred and despair, hatred for our communities, despair within our communities, then what we show up and do can be that counter narrative.
But
If there's a narrative about Black history and that Black people have not contributed anything, if that's the narrative that's being pushed, or if there's a narrative against like anti-truth, that people don't want truth being taught, then when we decide, well, no, not only am I going to teach truth, I'm going to do it all day long, then that's also a counter narrative around that, right? And so many Black youth are being raised in schools and to be taught like your people have never contributed to civilization.
Oh, wow.
right? And so when Carter G. Woodson starts off and saying like, no, like the only way for you to be a full human being is understand like not only have you contributed to civilization, you help lead civilization in so many different ways. If you grow up not thinking that, then your whole identity is that you're being raised to think that you're a stowaway to this path, this journey as in civilization, that you're a stowaway, not a contributor, not a leader. And so all of our actions can counter that if we choose to and if we're conscious about it.
Yeah, as you mentioned, if we're conscious about it, so you're going to find some educators who are not conscious about the contribution that we have made. How would you encourage those educators who are entrusted to help change
Mhm.
the narrative, to go in the classroom, to prepare themselves, to make sure they're not misleading the students? How would you encourage or share, talk to those individuals who may not know about the contribution?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can't be a teacher if you're not a student. So that's one. So if you're not studying, Malcolm used to say, "There's never 15 minutes where I'm not reading or thinking about how to advance my people." He's
Wow.
like, not even 15 minutes. Like, there's never 15 minutes that I'm not reading something about. If I have a free 15 minutes. He also said, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. History is best qualified to reward our research, which means studying, right? Dr. Greg Carr often, when he speaks to our youth, our young Black teacher apprentices, he's our guru, right? So he's very involved in the Freedom School movement in Philadelphia and our model of a teacher apprenticeship. And he often talks about the intellectual rigor necessary to be an effective educator and leader and just member of society, like the intellectual rigor. And so if we're not disciplined around in our approach, then it's going to be very hard to lead in a way that's going to be effective. If anything, we become incompetent in so many ways, and certainly not as successful as our children deserve. And so that having a student mindset means that you'll be a better teacher. And particularly if you're ignorant about the ecosystem and how anti-Black it is, and if part of your teaching isn't to help students develop shields and armor and weapons against anti-Blackness, then you're not really educating.
Hmm.
Like you can't be an educated person and not recognize how to navigate this society, how to change this society, how to make it better for you, for your people now, but also for your grandchildren, right? And that's often what we talk about to our teacher apprentices. It's like, all right, you're a high school and college youth, and you're teaching first, second, and third graders, but it's not just about that first, second, and third grader. Teach in a way that's going to impact those first, second, and third graders' grandchildren. Like that's how futuristic we're thinking about. Afrofuturism also it has to include education because we're saying, I'm going to teach you in a way, hopefully, and I'm going to plan to teach you in a way that impacts not just you, but your grandchildren. To
Right.
me, that's our orientation and framing and mindset because that's what was taught to us. Carter G. Woodson wasn't just doing that for his contemporaries. Dr. Carter G. Woodson was thinking about the generations beyond. Mary McLeod Bethune wasn't just thinking about her current. She started off with like 13 students. She wasn't just thinking about them. She was thinking about her students' grandchildren down the line, right? And that is the tradition of dope Black educators. When we talk about like in our series of Philly Seventh Ward blog site, we talk about Black Educator Hall of Famers. So I think right now we probably have like almost 100 Black Educator Hall of Famers that we've listed who've all not just thinking about what they were doing in that moment to be disconnected to things in the future. Now they looked at what they were doing in the moment to be tied to the past, but also futuristic. Here's what's going to happen. This is how we're preparing you to lead tomorrow and then yesterday, tomorrow. So those are the things that I think are just absolutely critical to how we plot and plan for our people.
I believe that's really important because do believe educators should be champions, especially champion the costs when it comes to Black students or Black people on a whole. If we're not being champions for our own people, then I believe we're doing a disservice. And I can just imagine being in your classroom or those Hall of Famers class, because for me, some of the things that I'm becoming aware of today, it's not something that was really taught to me. I didn't really grow up here. I grew up in Jamaica, so a lot of things are still new. But once I start to realize the impact that Black people have, like what contribution they have been making, it makes me want to dive deeper into learning from inventions, from the things that they have contributed to make life better. And for us today, it really empowers me, but it also gives me an opportunity when I'm talking to students that these are some of the things that we have contributed. You may not have been told about the contribution, you may not have been told about the impact. And it goes back to what you have just said with changing the narrative. We have to become cognizant of those things that we have done. Because if what we see, especially in media, doesn't reflect our great contribution, then we start to believe the negative things that we see.
Oh yeah. Not only believe it, but it comes out in our actions, and then we'll pour it into the next generation, right? Like, so it's not like that we believe it and then we just hold it in some cup internally. No, it's going to manifest itself in our actions, in our mindsets, and how we raise and how we orient the next generation. Like, we're going to tell them, face this way, we're going to tell them, walk this way. And if we've already digested and internalized self-hatred, then that's what we're going to teach the next generation, right? And so this is why I think that quote you were referring to earlier, I think from Lerone Bennett, it was like an educator in a system of oppression is either a revolutionary or an oppressor.
Yes.
And every day, that's the choice that we have to make as an educator. Dr. Chris Emdin talks about when we go into the classroom, when we go to a school, when we go into to a district or a school board, we're constantly have to think every day that a calculus should be, all right, today, am I going to do damage to the system or damage to students?
Oh, wow.
Usually that's the choice. What we teach, how we teach. Am I choosing to do damage to the system, or am I choosing to do damage to children? That's the prism we should use to differentiate about how and what we teach. What's our orientation and our mindsets? How we're uplifting, teaching truth, or how are we cowering under the pressure to promote anti-Blackness, to erase our history, to not excavate, supplement, or supplant curricula that's hateful towards Blackness. Those are the choices, and they're weighty choices, but they're choices that we have to make nonetheless.
I think that is important, and I think it does take courage to really champion the cause, especially.
That's why teaching well is a revolutionary act. That's why you talk about like what to tell Black men. James Baldwin said teaching is a revolutionary act. And we say like, yeah, and in this system, teaching Black children superbly is the revolutionary act. Teaching them superbly, not just showing up and teaching them white supremacy and anti-Blackness. That ain't revolutionary. But teaching them superbly, teaching them about positive racial identity development, making sure they're critical thinkers, making sure that they have the literacy, numeracy, and other things that were going to unlock doors and open up opportunities for them, teaching them about their community, about history, about their contributions, and what the future could look like. All of that is revolutionary. And like back to Dr. Martin Ryder, like what recruited me to forego my journey to law school and actually become an educator was this idea that the purest form of activism is teaching Black children well.
Wow.
And if we recognize that's the purest form of activism, and it's the most impactful way to institute racial and social justice is through education. I was like, yeah, then that's what I want to be involved in. That's the legacy that I want to follow.
Man, and that's important. And my next question was, going to be who inspired you to become an educator, but you have just answered it. But during that moment, when you were encouraged to go in the classroom or to become an educator, what was that like? Being that you wanted to become a lawyer, but what was that experience, maybe in that first year, making that transition from going to law school to being an educator?
It was very powerful. I mean, I was lucky, and I wish the experience that I had as a first year teacher was not so. I learned later that it was unique. I wish it wasn't so unique. So I would say a staff of maybe 50 or 60 teachers, there were only two first year teachers in there, right? Where now I hear about some schools, where they have such a significant number of new teachers, and it's almost like the blind leading the blind leading the blind. And there were two of us as first year teachers. So imagine that. And so being surrounded by amazing Black educators and white educators, but just like having a stable administration, a stable staff. I was only there. I got lucky. Like somebody, Miss Ridley was out on long-term disability. She had surgery or something, and so that's how I was able to get in, assigned to the school, and then they kept me. They were like, "Oh yeah, we want to keep this young man." But the mentorship that I had, the support, the models that I had on either side of me, of like the support was just absolutely astounding. And so I had an instructional coach, Miss Yvonne Savior, who previously had been Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year in 1992 or 1993. Like, so she was Pennsylvania's most celebrated teacher that year. Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year was my instructional coach.
Wow.
Miss Tanya Corbett, who's retiring this year, was my in-school mentor. So between these two Black women and what they poured into me to be an effective teacher, I didn't realize till much later that was not the experience of so many first year teachers. And I can't help but to think if everyone had a Miss Savior and a Miss Corbett and a Turner Middle School, which is where I started off, like how different their experience would be, but then how different would their students' experiences be. So I'm grateful. Like I was taught how to teach. I was taught how to lead by two amazing Black women, as well as others who were, as I said, in the school, who served as models and mentors. I would not be where I am today without them, just pouring so much of their knowledge into me. And I'm just eternally grateful. And I used to tell my students, you all should be eternally grateful too, because whatever positive experiences you have from me, I can trace them to
Somebody.
These educators. Yeah.
Man, and that's one thing that I not to say I lacked, but I become really aware of how important having mentors, having someone to guide you. Because when I started out, this was not the journey, but I've become like so much aware of learning from others, just the mentorship, because it doesn't matter how much you think you know, you always need to learn more. You all, as you've mentioned, that as educators are people of service, need to continue to be a student, need to be the person who wants to learn more. And what best way to learn that from someone who have gone through the process? We can read it in a textbook, but the experience sometimes carry more weight than just reading the information, and having someone who have gone the journey to really pour into you, man, that is priceless. So I can just imagine you being guided by someone who have been the teacher of the year. I can just imagine just the knowledge and wisdom that she have shared with you during that time. And I believe, man, as people, we all need to have individuals around us that we can learn from. And I also say we don't even have to, with technology right now, we can learn from individuals even without having direct contact, because we can watch their work, we can listen to what they're doing, we can read their work, And I think
I
just
got mentors. They don't even know me, but they're my mentors because I'm watching what they do, how they do it, how they navigate, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's my mentor. If somebody ever went up to them like, hey, so they're like, I've never heard of that boy. Yeah, I mean, like
that's right.
that's my mentor. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's right, man. Because we all should remain students, as you mentioned. Because if we want to be effective, we have to open our minds to learning. And I think, especially for us, when it comes to creating change or to be a positive role model or create positive impact, we have to be open to learning. And with that, I want to ask this question. What is your perspective on the current climate of Black men today, or
I mean, I think,
Black men in
I mean, in
society?
this country is, I mean, it's been the same that it's always been. And, black men are under attack and, from a lot of different, a lot of different ways. So those things haven't changed. Tactics may have changed, but you're still more likely to be unarmed murder victim by state-sanctioned police. You're more likely to be shown on TV as the criminal element in society. You're still more likely to be in prison for nonviolent issues. So all of these things, you're disproportionately more likely to be pushed out of school, be referred to special ed. Like, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so these are the things that have to inform our work. And this is like the sense of urgency that we have to bring to the forefront of our actions. And again, not urgency without love. Like, they have to be in together, because if you're urgent without love and respect and honoring a group of people, then you'll just run roughshod over them, and you'll end up crushing their aspirations and their humanity in different ways. But you have to have both of them, sense of urgency and love, and grounded in love for Black boys who are going to be Black men, for a Black community that loves their children and send them to us. We have to have an orientation where, like, so many people look at Black boys as deficient human beings and coming to schools, and we're going to fix them or we're going to break them. If they don't let us fix them, then we're going to break them, right? Like, that is, even if people don't use those words, you see it in policy, you see it in actions, you see it in just how they respond, react, and interact with young Black men. And that doesn't stop. It doesn't stop when they become Black men. When there's research after research that shows that Black children experience their teachers' racial biases as early as 3 and 4 years old. So that's pre-K. So is that the first time you're experiencing racism as a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old? Where you're already being treated differently.
Yeah.
And that difference in being treated doesn't stop when you're 7 or 8 or 18 and 19. It just continues to become more complex and becomes more oppressive.
Oh, wow. I was just listening to what you're saying, that yes, we are treated differently. So once we become aware of that treatment, especially as adults, what can we do from that perspective of how we are treated in society? What can we do to counter that type of treatment that may sometimes come to us?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is making sure that we don't choose to say, hey, the difference that I'm going to make is I'm going to be the one to hold the whip. Because everybody doesn't want to end white supremacy. Some people just want to better their positions within it.
Yeah.
And so, the number one thing is, like, how do we treat each other and how do we treat ourselves? Regardless of what society says about me, I have to think about, how am I going to treat me? How am I going to be responsible for my self-care? How am I going to protect and my self-determination? How am I going to teach self-determination? And how am I going to demonstrate love and respect? The opposite of maybe what I experience from society. How am I going to show something and demonstrate something the opposite of that to people who look like me, including the one in the mirror? And so for me, it's still, you start off the conversation with mindset. It still goes back to mindset. Like, how are we choosing to respond when we're in a hostile environment? Do we become hostile? Right? My mother used to say, your oppressor is your best teacher. And it can be the best teacher because I'm emulating what they taught me, or they taught me how to protect myself and my community from their piercing arrows, right? Like, and so either way, they could be your best teacher. And so that's what we have to be critically conscious about. And again, back to like Dr. Beverly Tatum's work around being conscious and constantly cleaning the filter, but also analyzing what particles are trapped in this filter and what got through.
Wow.
What racist messages got trapped in the filter and what got through.
Man, and it's just something really profound. When we're in a system that doesn't work for us, some of us, and I've seen this myself, try to better themselves within the system. So what they do don't really impact the Black students per se or Black people in a positive way. But you also share, which I do believe that the environment we're in, either teaching us how to be better or teaching us what not to do. Because, we see things and you say, you know what, this is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure I'm the example. I'm what the next generation can be or should be as we go forward when we're thinking about changing the narrative, changing the perspective or the misconception. Because if we don't take charge of, just from what I believe, if we don't take charge of the image, the perspective, things may not change. Because I don't believe we should allow someone to do for us what we can do for ourselves. So we have to take charge of that narrative that we want to represent us. Just from what you're sharing, and I think that's one thing that we have to really take charge of when it comes to change for us and stuff like that. Make sure we're not modeling the hate that we sometimes experience. Yes.
Yeah. Just internalization, just happens, so much, so often. And we see that. Sometimes it's like not just, I don't want to be whipped. I want to hold the whip.
Yeah.
I want to do the whipping. It's it's unfortunate. And we have to recognize like that is part of, unfortunately, the human condition. And so, but we have so many people that show the opposite, who are able to resist and out of love help uplift at the same time. Not just resist, but uplift, right? Because resistance sometimes can just be your own self-preservation and not community facing.
Yeah.
But if it's both, that's how heroes are made, right? Like that's where it becomes, and we need more everyday heroes, not just the singular, oh, we watched him and this person's on a stamp now. Like, no, what does the everyday heroism look like? And how can we find it and uplift it in our schools, in our communities, in our faith-based institutions, in the political arena? Who are those folks, and how do we uplift, celebrate, and emulate their work? But particularly those who are facing our youth and communities. To me, that's where many of those folks, that grandmother in the community who's always just giving for their community, that barber who's constantly mentoring and whispering aspirations to every Black youth who comes in their spaces, who's de-escalating constantly petty squabbles, right? Like to help them see the humanity in their brother when they feel aggrieved. All of those folks they'll never be known usually, besides the folks that they directly impacted. But those are folks that I think about often, who are in our communities, who are just doing such tremendous work to try to hold the threads together for a beleaguered community that we often find ourselves in, that we're born in, that we live in, that we love, but also are trying to withstand just monumentally oppressive forces and disinvestment and just hostility from the political world, from the media, from the educational system, just all the institutions that are supposedly there to serve. How much undermining do they do, and how are other people trying to mend the pieces and tend to the damage and the havoc that's being wreaked? in our communities. And so they're nameless, they're faceless, and they are there
You know,
without a doubt.
yes, I do believe, especially in the barbershops. I've seen a few barbers, they were having books, not just any books, they were having Black books to empower Black boys, especially what is possible. So I do know those individuals are there, and yes, they sometimes don't get the publicity, but I do believe they understand the assignment. So they are doing their part. And it's not really about being known, but making their contribution in their communities. So the next generation can see themselves from a different perspective than what sometimes they are told about who they are as individuals. And that lead me to this question. What was a pivotal moment in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many. I mean, one being blessed to being born in the family that I was born into, the community that they chose for us and being raised. I think attending Nidam Musasa as an elementary school, being a part of just these very deliberate communities. All of those are just pivotal. Spending time overseas in Iran, in Qom, Iran, as a middle school student, all of those are, just I continue to reap benefits from that even as a grown adult.
Okay, okay. So before I ask my last question, where can the listeners find you, find your work, and support the work that you're doing?
Oh, you know what? We're on all the social media platforms at the Center Black Ed. They can visit our website, www.thecenterblacked.org. Right now, we're recruiting hard for Black high school and college youth interested in teaching as a paid apprenticeship for this summer. Again, in person in Memphis, Camden, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Detroit, as well as virtually. And I'm also a contributor on Philly's 7th Ward.org, which is a blog site. That's Philly's, Phillys, the number 7th WARD. Philly's, the 7th Ward is a nod to W.B. Du Bois, his work here in Philadelphia, where he did a lot of work and back then what they used to call the 7th Ward, which was the blackest ward in the city. And so this is a nod to, again, connecting the history. This is, we try to use a national perspective, but it's grounded in W.B. Du Bois's, work. And you can also hear us every Sunday evening, 9 p.m. I'm a contributor and one of the panelists on the 8 Black Hands podcast that comes out every Sunday. Today, Sunday, February 19th, we have our 199th episode where 4 Black men are talking about different perspectives, but all centering the 8 million Black students in American schools. So,
Okay. Yes, and I'll definitely put ways to connect with you in the description so the individuals can reach out to you and support the great work that you're doing. So my final question is, what impact do you want to have on the world?
uh, I think I would borrow from Tupac, where it's not necessarily about my impact, but hopefully my students and their children will ultimately have the impact. I think sometimes it's less about. I read a quote once where sometimes it's less about what you do, it's about who you're raising. I mean, I firmly believe, particularly as educators, it's less about us and it's more about what and how you teach that's going to have the impact on the world, and it's going to be through the actions of your students and your grand students and beyond. So for me, that's what it's about. And I don't think that's not my philosophy of what can I do. It's really like, who can I serve, who can I support, so that they can, and then you fill in the blank.
Man, that's awesome. I know you have been making a tremendous impact, although you don't put it on you, but the work that you have been doing have really changed lives, have really given us perspective on how to serve better. And I think,
But even with that, Dr. Cross,
yes,
it's always been about the team. And so even if there has been an impact,
yes,
it's been the team that I've been a part of that made the impact.
that's right. That's right.
Because individually, solely, I mean, yeah, there are some folks who can just single-handedly do things, but I'm not built that way. But I could definitely be part of a team that makes an impact, God willing.
And that's a great perspective too. And that's something that we all need to do more of, even myself, having that team that can help us. Because as they said, by yourself, you can go fast, and together,
Maybe.
you can go further. Something
Yeah,
of nature. So
absolutely.
you have a greater impact when you work with individuals, especially individuals who have the same vision or believe in your vision or a collective vision, but it have to be supported by the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. So thanks again, Mr. El-Mekki, for being here on the Black Male Impact, man. It's been a pleasure. I've been watching your
My
work. I've
pleasure.
been reading, the stuff that you're sharing. It gives me perspective, because I'm always here to learn more. So, man, I really appreciate you being here and sharing with the listeners today.
Thank you so much. My pleasure to be here. And thanks for inviting me. It's good to be in community with you and your listeners.
Man, thanks for being here. And as always, thanks for listening to the Black Male Impact. As always, the goal is to inspire positive change. Please like, share, and comment, and your support is always appreciated. Thanks for being here with us on the Black Male Impact.